Second, you can start, please.
Yeah.
Are you starting now?
Yes,
Sir, we are live. Please. Yeah.
Okay, now we can start. Okay, yeah. Very good evening to all respected doctors. I am Dr. Kunal Javeri from Zydus Medical Team, and I do warm welcome each one of you on Scientific DAPA Live panel discussion with a topic on role of SGLT2 inhibitors as a cardiorenal game changer. Respected doctors, as we know that the diabetes is one of the most commonly prevalent metabolic condition in the entire world. But parallelly, it's unfortunate that in the last 10 to 12 years, number of the effective treatment options are developed like DPP-4 inhibitors, SGLT2 inhibitors, GLP-1 analogs, and newer insulins. And due to that, more customized approach for managing type 2 diabetes is now possible in today's era. One more viewpoint is that if we recollect the days when hydroxychloroquine was approved for the type 2 diabetes, then many of us were curious that how an anti-malarial drug so much effective for the anti-diabetic. Today is almost same situation, but it is in the reverse aspect that how can one anti-diabetic molecule have an effective role in heart failure, chronic kidney disease, blood pressure reduction, weight reduction, and in nearby future, it may have an effective role in obesity and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease as well. So to discuss on this aspect for the role of SGLT2 inhibitors as a cardiorenal game changer, we have invited esteemed panel of experts from the South Zone, especially from Hyderabad, and it is my immense pleasure to invite our faculty today. So, to take the presentation today, we have take a presentation Dr. R.N. Mehrotra, who is a senior consultant endocrinology at Apollo Hospital, Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad, who has a very vast experience in the field of therapy area of endocrinology and worked very extensively in research and investigation of the various molecules. He has been remain the principal investigator and multi-centric randomized trials like Pearl trial, then also the trials for the osteoporosis like Generations trial, then diabetic nephropathy like Gold trials, and many trials on the comparison of statin and the diabetic neuropathy. So definitely here we are going to have an advantage to take his own feedback and the experience on the SGLT2 inhibitors as a cardiorenal game changer. Along with that, we have Dr. Sridhar Kasturi, who is a senior consultant interventional cardiologist and head of the department and director of cardiology at Sunshine Heart Institute at Hyderabad, who is organizing secretary for NICCSA 2018 and won the Legend of the Cardiology in 2017-18 by Times of India, who was the best among the South Interventional Cardiologists Global Healthcare Awards 2018, and the faculty member of National Heart Center at Singapore, CAD Asia Summit, VBS Summit, India Live, and there are many more like that. And the second best case award he received at the EuroPCI 2014, and who is president of Cardiology Society of India in Telangana, has received a CITD award 2003 from Surjit Singha Barnala, governor of AP, and who was a course director for Hyderabad Live, Hyderabad Interventional Club as well. And he has more than 2 decades of experience and performed more than 25,000 angiograph and 3,000 interventional procedures. Along with our 2 moderators, those who are going to presentation as well, they will share some questions and for the panel discussion. So we have very esteemed panelist, Dr. M.S. Aditya, who is a senior consultant interventional cardiologist at Yashoda Hospital, Secunderabad, and who has done the number of presentations like FFR in complex coronary artery disease in TCT USA 2012, pulse wave analysis and correlation with severity of coronary artery disease in CSA 2009, platelet reactivity testing after triple antibiotic therapy in 2008, APCSI, study of melandialdehyde levels in patients of inflammatory
should
brain
come
disease
around
in 2004, and then study of plasma ascorbic acid levels in patient with cerebrovascular disease, which was done in EPICON 2005. Along with that, we have Dr. P. Vikrant Reddy, who is a consultant nephrologist at CARE Hospital, Banjara Hills, Hyderabad, who has received a base paper award for the infection in hemodialysis unit at our experience at SCI SN 2005, Southern Chapter, Indian Society of Nephrology Annual Meet at Chennai, and also
172.5.
done the publication on the various topic in national and international journal as well. And definitely we are going to have more aspect, especially on the DAPA-CKD aspect, the role of dapagliflozin on chronic kidney disease from him. We have Dr. Sridevi Paladugu. She is a consultant endocrinologist at Apollo Hospital, Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad, and she has number of awards and achievement like MM Swami and SV Rao Award for Best Research in MD, who has received highest marks in MD from Osmania Medical College and Vaidya Award from NKV Trust, Hyderabad, who was a clinical tutor honor from AHERF, reviewer for endo conferences, international presentation in SAPs and endo ICE, and done the number of publications, national and international journals. We have Dr. Ashok Venkata Narsu, who is a consultant endocrinologist at Sanjeevani Thyroid Hormone and Sugar Clinic at Hyderabad, who is also very interested in the very research activities and number of publications in various national and international journals, who has started an health awareness foundation also as a Sanjeevani Arogya Jagruti to improve the awareness regarding diabetes, thyroid and other endocrine disorders in the community, who has written a book on diabetes for the common man with the title of Know Your Diabetes for a Happy Life in both Telugu and English languages. And he is interested as the photography, cooking, and that good hobbies are there apart from his clinical practice. We have Dr. K. Sumna. She is assistant professor of endocrinology at NIMS Hospital, Hyderabad. She has done various research on the topics like renal function, primary hypothyroidism, clinical study of primary hyperparathyroidism. He has done the poster presentation on the rare case of 17-hydroxylase deficiency at ESICON 2015, who has achieved an academic many achievements like gold medal in physiology in MBBS first year and university 5th rank in MD General Medicine University exam, and who has done the very important publications on the rare case of, as we discussed, the renal function primary hypothyroidism as well. So we have very good and very esteemed faculties from the endo and nephro and cardiotherapy area, those who are going to discuss this SGLT2 inhibitors in different therapy with the latest updates on different trials. So without not taking much time here, I would like to share my screen to Dr. R.N. Mehrotra sir, who is going to start a presentation and start the panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity today. I think we welcome all the panelists and all the faculties. Yeah, we'll be discussing on the role of SGLT2 inhibitor, which has been basically given the title of cardiorenal game changer by the ADA now. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the background of, I hope I'm audible and clear. If anything, let me know, please. Yeah. If you look at the diabetes, basically has been defined as a metabolic disorder, which has abnormality in glucose metabolism, which can be because of either insulin secretion problem or insulin sensitivity problem, but lead to the vascular complications. And if you look at the SGLT2 inhibitors, it's a, I would not call really a new class. Basically, I would say the discovery has been new from the last couple of years, but basically it was launched around 5 to 6 years back. And they have got a lot of attention in the recent past because of their role in preventing or their data on the kidney disease or the cardiovascular disease, such as the heart failure. They have particularly become the, maybe if not the first line, second line agent for the patient with associated comorbidities. And as I said, they have been given the status of the game changer because of they changed the data about the dapagliflozin in the heart failure and the chronic kidney disease. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at why the diabetes is so important, why should we be worried about diabetes? The main thing is the number of patients are increasing the worldwide. And with that, we get more and more number of patients are getting with the associated complication. If you look at the worldwide burden, it's increasing by practically by 51% in practically next 15 years or 25 years. And if you look at the Southeast Asia, it's increasing by 74%. The maximum, I think, if you increase looking at coming from the Middle East and North Africa, that's practically around North Africa, 96%, and Africa 143%. So that is basically the Middle East and the Asia and the Africa. I would be the next focus of the importance of diabetes prevalence if you look at the numbers. Next slide, please. Now look at the India basically. If you look at the figure, we are basically just second to China in this number of games. And if you look at the projected figures, by 2030, we'll be having our increase around by 40%, by 45 around 32%. So numbers are increasing rapidly. It's not only the numbers of diabetes patients, it's the number of patients who will require additional care for the comorbid complications, the retinopathies, nephropathies, cardiovascular complications. So that number is very, very scary. If you look at, even if you 2 to 3% patients have complications, they are going to put the burden on the national medical services, and they'll not be enough. Like what we're finding in the COVID season, whatever the infrastructure was increased was not found to be enough. When the peak came, and same thing will be here, when the number of patients are going to increase, they are going to put a burden on your infrastructure. Next slide, please. If you look at the prevalence, age, gender specific prevalence of diabetes in our country, and you look at it here, the left hand is the male and the right hand is the female, and you can see very clearly the blue curve shows the 1990 and the red is the 2016. This is confirmed data, and you can look at here. If you look at the age of 45 to 59, it's gone up by, say, from 8.8 to 11.1. Or on average, if you look at the age of, say, 35 to 49, around 5.1 to 8.4. The numbers are basically, it's increasing, and we know that the background is basically the Asian. You look at the Indian population, the background basically comes from our genetic factors. We have metabolic, we are basically more having insulin resistant, metabolically obese. We have poor beta cell function, and our children habits are not going to be very healthy. They are sedentary, their dietary habits are poor, and we have more carb intake. So there are multiple factors increasing the prevalence of diabetes in our country. Next slide, please. If you look at the management of type 2 diabetes, if you look at what we had till decade back, basically our mainstay was sulfonylureas and metformin, and then came the beta cell, the DPP-1 inhibitors. They were the mainstay of treatment of diabetes, and after that we were using the insulin. But if you look at the oral drugs, they are basically dependent upon the beta cell function, the amount of insulin being secreted, to give you the benefit effect of the therapy. In case there was a progressive beta cell degradation or the function came down, then you find that with the time, the effect of these medication would go off, and you would need a combination of insulin therapy with oral anti-diabetic agents. But as I said, in say particularly last 5, 6 to 7 years, we have seen the introduction of SGLT2 inhibitors. They basically have an effect on of the inhibition of glucose reabsorption for the kidneys. So they're not dependent upon the glucose beta cell function on their effect, and they give a better durable control of diabetes. And they can be effective at any age. They can be effective at the early onset of diabetes with metformin, or they can be, if somebody's on insulin and combination, even then they can be effective to control the sugar. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at this slide, the headline says glycemic variability and complication. Now, glycemic variability can be basically you can say of 3 kinds. One is the intraday variability. You look at the fasting sugars are normal or low, or the pre-lunch or the post-lunch. That variability basically is called the intraday variability. Then comes the day-to-day variability, where we're looking at the fasting sugars from day to day. Today fasting was 140, let's say it was 100, then next day 180. So that variability is called day-to-day variability. Then we have the long-term variability. If you look at, there's all the A1C variability. And that basically, all the 3 variabilities have a very important role to play in the diabetic complications. They have multiple factors behind it. There could be some patient factors, the erratic meal timings, erratic exercise timing, erratic diabetic medicine intake. If you take a sulfonylurea or a regular insulin after half an hour of the meal, you're bound to have the glycemic variability. Then there's some patient factors like the variability in carbohydrate intake or the patient declining function. They would call a more glycemic variability would be there. Now, if you look at the onset of macrovascular complications, they start with the onset of diabetes diagnosis. But the macrovascular complications may start even before the diabetes complications, the diabetes diagnosis is made. And most of the complications are worsened by glycemic variability. Now, if you're looking at here, it shows that the green line is the expected trajectory and warning we want for A1C. The sugars come down and they remain quite well controlled for long duration of time. That's what we expect and what we want. But what we are getting basically is you see that sawtooth appearance upside. We normally start with monotherapy when patient become uncontrolled, then we add second agent, then we add third agent, then we add fourth agent. And that basically gives the rise of the uncontrolled or glycemic variable kind of picture, and which is not good for the diabetes complication. They do have a role to play in diabetes complication. Next slide, please. Now, go back to the law. Now, this statement basically is, I think, has to be modified a little bit. It should be failure of sustained glycemic durable control, which can lead to dysglycemic legacy. So the time you spend in the uncontrolled diabetes will give you more rise of complications. It should be the word, I think, should be the failure of sustained glycemic durable control, which is leading to poor control of diabetes and leads to more complications. Next slide, please. Now, this was basically a protocol on the patients on RDO and metformin of 1.5 grams published last year. They were not controlled. They were randomized either to a dapagliflozin of 10 milligram or saxagliptin of 5 milligram per day. And then they looked at which patient had a drug failure earlier or who required the rescue medication early. You see that patients who are using dapagliflozin and metformin, they had lower chance of failure and they required less chance of requiring a rescue medication. That was around 3.4% to 9.4%. The patient on saxagliptin and metformin, they had more chance of failure. They required more commonly they required a rescue medication. If you look at we look at the durability control of dapagliflozin and metformin, I think the data have more than 2 years data is there now, and they give SGLT2 inhibitor with metformin gives you a very good durable control. Coupled with that, we'll see the benefits what they have. Next slide, please. Now coming to the first question, I think it will be addressed to Dr. Sridevi. How clinically relevant is the glycemic durability in the management of diabetes? Dr. Sridevi?
Good evening, sir. Thank you for this question. So as we were discussing, type 2 diabetes is a chronic illness that is going to last a lifetime. And if you look at the natural progression of diabetes, that there is initial normoglycemia, but only genetic susceptibility, followed by hyperinsulinemic phase with normoglycemia, leading on to pre-diabetic stage and type 2 diabetes. In type 2 diabetes, initial control can be achieved with oral medications and exercise, followed by when there is complete beta cell failure or the secondary beta cell failure, insulin requirement. So we can see that natural progression of diabetes is showing a gradual decline in the beta cell function. So this point is important when we are dealing with oral anti-diabetic agents, especially agents like sulfonylureas, which are predominantly dependent on the insulin in the beta cells. Now, from studies like UKPDS and DCCT, we have seen that HbA1c of 7% is associated with the reduction in diabetes-related endpoints. And the long-term studies following UKPDS and DCCT, which were for about 10 years follow-up studies, have shown us that early good long-term glycemic control is associated with a reduction in the macrovascular complications, and ultimately mortality. Now, these were post-trial for about 10 years post-trial, and early glycemic control leads to a reduction in the long-term complications is a known fact, which is popularly known as the legacy effect or the metabolic memory. So when we start medications for our diabetic patients, it is important that we enforce an early and effective long-term glycemic control. So for this, the we have 4 or 5 classes of drugs. Of course, diet and exercise form the cornerstone of any diabetic patient's management. But if we look at an average type 2 diabetic patient who comes to us, say at around 45 years of age, his diabetes starts, if it starts at around 45 years of age, for the next 40 odd years, he needs medications. And we have about 5 to 6 classes of oral medications, which we'll have to give this patient for these 40 years. And hence, medications which have good glycemic control and glycemic durability are the need of the hour. And if you look at the individual classes of medications, we have a few studies which address this glycemic durability, wherein metformin has around 79% glycemic 5-year long durability studies, and vildagliptin and glimepiride have around 60%, and pioglitazone has around 85% 5-year durability studies, which is from the ADOPT trial. And as Dr. Mehrotra was presenting, we do have studies about SGLT2 inhibitors also. So when we are dealing with our diabetic patients, it is very, very important that we choose medications which have a long-term effect and which can enforce early diabetic control. So.
Thank you, Dr. Sridevi, for your anything more?
No, sir, I'm done.
Yeah. So thank you for your comments. If anybody else want to have a comment on this, we can wait for a while or go to the next slide. If there are no more comments coming in, then we'll go to the next part. We have looked at basically the inhibitors give you a good durable control. Now we know that diabetic basically is not only the sugars. So we know that they come with the burden of the obesity and patient having associated blood hypertension and dyslipidemia. And they are at a great increased risk of cardiovascular and renal complications, which, as I said, they lead to a lot of mortality and morbidity. Now, if you look at the class of SGLT2 inhibitors, they have benefits which are beyond the glycemic control. And they are like improvement in blood pressure, body weight, and lipid levels. And we know that they have cardiovascular and renal benefits, which are not being only explained by weight and blood pressure. They are much more effective, which I think the second speaker will be taking care of. But if you look at the, as far as I'm concerned, we have to look at the benefits which are beyond the glycemic control is the blood pressure and the body weight and lipid values. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the patients who are on metformin, 1.5 grams, who are not controlled, you can see more than 7 or less than 10. Or randomized to either dapagliflozin 5 or 10 milligram as add-on therapy. And you can see that the weight reduction with the 5 milligram was around 3 kgs, and with 10 milligram was around 2.9. So practically the dose did not make an effect on the weight, the quantity of weight change, but both had beneficial effect on the weight difference of at least 3 to 2.9 kgs. If you look at the effect on the blood pressure, similarly, you see the reduction of blood pressure is by 4.5 to 5.3 millimeter, which is quite significant. We know that given the drugs, this becomes an important fact. When we're adding a dapagliflozin to the patient's already existing medication, we need to look at the case somebody has orthostatic hypotension, so we may need to adjust the dose. So if you look at the effect, they have a good effect on blood pressure and weight, which have add-on benefit to the patient. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at the patient already are treated with dapagliflozin and on metformin, if you look at the A1Cs for variable 6.5 to 13, 45 to 80, BMI more than 20. Now, if you look at the effect on the lipid values, they're quite interesting. Total cholesterol comes down. Now, most of the literature say the LDL cholesterol may go up, which may be non-atherogenic cholesterol, but their value goes up. But in this particular protocol, we are finding the LDL cholesterol is coming down by around 13.4 milligram. It's quite welcome, but I think the data is a little bit, has to be looked again in this. Triglycerides come down. So if you look at the total cholesterol is coming down, triglycerides is coming down. HDL slightly goes up. If you look at the ratio of HDL LDL, that is beneficial. But in this particular protocol, the LDL cholesterol is going up and HDL is going up. That is more beneficial for us. You look at the complete extra glycemic benefits. We have decreased blood pressure, decreased weight, and improvement in the lipid values. And though the LDL cholesterol might go up slightly, the ratio is not isogenic. If the ratio remains the same, so they are having supposed to have the at least a good benefit on the cardiovascular disease or the diabetes patient. Next slide. So coming to my second question, Dr. Sumona will be answering it. How do extra glycemic benefits of SGLT2 inhibitors like blood pressure and body weight or improvement in lipid parameters influence your management of comorbidities in diabetes? Dr. Sumona, please.
Sir, thank you for the question, sir. So, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yes, sir. Yeah, sir. So, first of all, I mean, we all know that the major morbidity and mortality in type 2 diabetes is mainly due to cardiovascular and, of course, also due to the chronic, chronic kidney disease. So, if we only just control the blood sugars, it is not going to bring down the mortality and the morbidity. And so it is very important also to address the other comorbidities or other conditions which also coexist with diabetes. For example, many of the type 2 diabetes are also associated with obesity or overweight, and many of them do have hypertension and dyslipidemia. So if we can have a molecule which can address all these parameters, I think definitely it is a welcoming, it's a great advantage. And also the weight loss achieved is also very significant. For example, all these SGLT2 inhibitors and even for dapagliflozin, they cause a weight loss of about 3 to 4 kgs. They cause the weight loss mainly by increasing the glucose excretion in the urine. Like they cause about 60 to 80 grams of glucose in the urine, and which translates to at around 250 to 300 kilocalories per day. And the weight reduction, it doesn't happen not only due to the water loss or anything, it also actually reduces the fat. So it reduces the visceral fat and subcutaneous fat. And in fact, some studies also have shown that these SGLT2 inhibitors, they also reduce the epicardial fat. So in that way, and also by reducing the body weight, actually obesity is also an inflammatory state. So so when somebody's body weight is reduced by to some extent, it also reduces the inflammation and also the insulin resistance. So it is helping directly and also indirectly by also reducing the insulin resistance. So I think that will be one greater advantage. And also just not only by reducing the obesity, but in general also these SGLT2 inhibitors, they have the action of anti-inflammatory and as well as antioxidant effects. So many studies have shown that these molecules particularly, they can reduce the pro-inflammatory markers, like for example, IL-6, TNF alpha, TGF beta, NOX4 and all. So that is, so basically they, they can modify the pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory levels by decreasing the pro-inflammatory molecules and by increasing the anti-inflammatory molecules. So I think it's a great advantage. And also if we think all these DAPA-HFs, I mean, many these studies with dapagliflozin or empagliflozin or with canagliflozin, all these studies have shown cardiovascular benefit. I mean, it is a well-known thing. And if we see, and these benefits were actually seen well in the beginning years of the study. I mean, actually well in the beginning weeks of the study. So if we see the graphs start getting diversifying, like maybe after some 15 weeks of the study. So this particularly indicates, so whatever the cardiovascular benefits are seen, they are not only due to the reducing glycemic efficacy, but it is due to something else. So it could be actually due to this reduction in BP and then reduction in the weight and also dyslipidemia. And coming to the dyslipidemia, it is actually like, sir, just now Dr. R.N. Mehrotra sir has showed a slide where this shows actually the LDL cholesterol is also decreased. Until now, we were all thinking LDL cholesterol is increased. And of course, the type of LDL was not so harmful, but still this is a new study which shows LDL cholesterol is also decreased in total cholesterol and triglycerides. If that happens, I think it is definitely a greater advantage. But of course, this is a one study and still a small study. Excuse me. And of course, we'll need more data on that. But if at all this happens, I think it will be a really a great boom for all the diabetes in this population. And it's not only about that, and also the BP reduction, though the numbers might seem small, but even that small reduction also, I think it translates into some amount of mortality and morbidity reduction, especially because many of the type 2 diabetes, they are borderline hypertensive. And many of us also, many clinicians, they have some kind of reservation in starting BP medication when the BP levels are only more borderline or in the mild levels. So I think by reducing the BP and all, I think it definitely plays a great role in that aspect. This SGLT2 inhibitors, they not only reduce the BP or not only reduce the weight or they modify the dyslipidemia, but actually they also show many other pleiotropic effects. Like for example, they also decrease the uric acid. And not only that, and they also modify the endothelial function. They improve the endothelial function, and also they decrease the arterial stiffness, which ultimately are going to lead to the cardiovascular mortality and morbidity. And also when we come to the when it comes to the weight loss, the other group which also causes weight loss is GLP-1 analogs. But the disadvantage with the GLP-1 analogs is that they also cause sympathetic activation. So that might be not a great advantage. But with these molecules, it not only causes the weight reduction, but by means of natriuresis and osmotic diuresis, it also causes the BP reduction. But whereas in case of GLP-1 analogs, this might not be the case. So I think when we have a molecule which can address other parameters apart from glycemia, because glycemia is being controlled by many other molecules also, but if we can have a molecule which can also target the actual parameters which also contribute to a greater extent to the morbidity and mortality, I think it's a really great. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sumana, for your good explanation of the importance of controlling comorbidity. I think I've finished my part of the presentation. Dr. Kasturi will take over from here now. Welcome, sir.
Sridhar sir, unmute sir. We are unable to hear.
Good evening to all of you, and
evening,
special thanks to Dr. Kunal and Taher and respected faculty members. I'm very, very happy to interact with all of you. Today, I'll be discussing about this newer generation of anti-diabetic drug, which is proven to be very beneficial, particularly from cardiovascular aspect. And many large clinical trials of diabetes type 2 mellitus, particularly the SGLT2 inhibitors, as you said, like EMPA-REG, DECLARE, CANVAS, all these trials have shown there is a definite reduction in the risk of repeat hospitalizations because of the heart failures. And these inhibitors also have shown there is and it decreases the progression of the cardiac and renal effects. That is very, very important, because if you see the cardiovascular disease, these three are together like a great friends. For us, three enemies like a cardiovascular disease, renal disease, diabetic. So in a cardiology practice, we always say diabetic or non-diabetic, because the diabetes is associated with a very, very high mortality and morbidity in cardiovascular. Post-PCA recurrence, post-bypass recurrence rate is very, particularly female diabetes, diffuse long lesions are there. During PCA, thrombosis is very high. So there are many complications with the diabetes compared to non-diabetic. At the same time, we always ask for what is the GFR, what is the serum creatinine, because the diabetes can produce the renal failure, and the diabetes also because the cardiac effect can cause the cardiac dysfunction, and that may lead to decreased output, and ultimately it may affect the renal function also. Whenever the renal function also derange, it determines the prognosis of the cardiac failure very, very adversely. That's the reason diabetes and kidney, these two are greatest enemies for cardiac patients. So always we should address this whenever we are treating the patient, cardiac effects, renal effects, and diabetic. If you are managing these, many times you can reduce the mortality and morbidity very, very ill. And the DAPA heart failure trial, the investigators, they wanted to see what is the efficacy of the dapagliflozin in heart failure patients. Yeah, you can change the slide. And for the first time in this trial, they have seen the effect of the dapagliflozin with or without diabetes. So in heart failures, where the patient is having a diabetes or non-diabetic, they tried for the first time in this trial. So only 45% of the patients had a type 2 diabetes mellitus at the baseline. So remaining patients are non-diabetic patients. The total study population, 4,744 patients, and involving the 20 countries. They mainly included the New York Heart Association class 2 to 4 and LV ejection fraction less than 40, NT-proBNP more than 600. In a nutshell, they have picked up the only patients with heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction. And they were excluded EGFR less than 30 ml and systolic blood pressure less than 95 and type 1 diabetes. This group of patients, they were excluded. And total, the 2,370 patients were subject to placebo therapy and 2,373 patients were subjected for dapagliflozin 10 milligram once daily. So followed up for like 14 days, 60 days, 120 and every 120 days. And the median duration of follow-up 18.2 durations. So the main primary endpoints, that is cardiovascular death, heart failure aspiration, any urgent heart failure visits. These are the primary endpoints. Go to the next one. Next slide. So recently they have shown the DAPA heart failure trial results. And this study has shown very clearly there is a 26% reduction in composite of worsening of heart failure or cardiovascular death and a 25% reduction in hospitalization from heart failure and cardiovascular death. And there is 17% reduction of all-cause mortality and cardiovascular death was reduced by 18% and hospitalization from heart failure was reduced and death was reduced by 30%. So that means it met the primary composite endpoints. That is, there is a reduction of composite of worsening of heart failure, cardiovascular death, and all-cause mortality and cardiovascular death. Go to the next. Next. So if you see the dapagliflozin group, it favored over the placebo group in reducing the cardiovascular death, hospitalization for heart failure, urgent heart failure visit, and outpatient intensification of heart failure therapy, and hospitalization for heart failure and urgent heart failure visit, cardiovascular death, hospitalization for heart failure, and there is a reduction of cardiovascular death, hospitalization for heart failure and urgent heart failure visit. So indirectly, they have chosen 4 components of composite outcome reflecting the worsening of heart failure. So first one is they have like a time to first occurrence of cardiovascular death, hospitalization for heart failure, and worsening of heart. So indirectly, so there are many favorable effects in dapagliflozin group over the placebo group. So episodes of outpatient worsening were reduced significantly in dapagliflozin group. Go to the next one. So this is in comparison with Emperor Reduced, where they have tried empagliflozin. That is also they have chosen the heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction, similar group of patients, and there the molecule is different, empagliflozin. So they compared, suppose the all-cause mortality was reduced in EMPA group, that is 8%, which is non-significant, but the cardiovascular death 8% again in EMPA group versus this is almost much more significant compared to that is 18% in DAPA and 17% in DAPA heart failure group. So first hospitalization for heart failure and cardiovascular death, 25% in EMPEROR reduced and 26% in DAPA heart failure. The first hospitalization for heart failure, 31% in EMPEROR reduced and DAPA heart failure 30%. So indirectly, the net benefit of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular death is much more significant in DAPA heart failure group compared to EMPEROR reduced. Go to the next one. Though it's not a direct head-to-head comparison, but to prove further, it requires head-to-head comparison study. But only comparative-wise, dapagliflozin scores over the empagliflozin. So based upon these trial results, Canadian Cardiovascular Society and Canadian Heart Failure Society has recommended in their guidelines the empagliflozin, canagliflozin, dapagliflozin. So they recommended for the treatment of type 2 diabetes mellitus with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, mainly to reduce the risk of heart failure, hospitalization, and death. And the new updated guidelines is dapagliflozin, particularly in type 2 diabetes with the age more than 50 years with additional risk factors for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease to reduce the risk of heart failure, hospitalization. So another one, that SGLT2, mainly dapagliflozin, is recommended for heart failure due to reduced left ventricular ejection fraction, that is less than 40% with concomitant diabetes. And the another indication, even without diabetes mellitus, heart failure with a reduced ejection fraction less than 40%, for without diabetes also, they have recommended. Go to the next one. So indirectly, any heart failure with or without diabetes, particularly if they have a ejection fraction of less than 40, is strongly recommended. I take this question to Dr. Aditya. The question is, post-DAPA heart failure, what seems to be the exact place in therapy for dapagliflozin in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction? Over to you, Dr. Aditya.
Sir, thank you for the question and good evening to all. Sir, basically, when I was doing a review of this DAPA-HF trial, I mean, it's important. I thought, I mean, why is this drug at all a diabetic drug? I thought it should be a heart failure drug because so negligible was the effect on the HbA1c and also the benefits to the heart failure patients were so vast. So I thought it should be a cardiovascular drug rather than a drug for diabetes management. But then the point is, I think diabetes and heart failure share a commonality. In the sense that both are similar in the way that there is insulin resistance and also endothelial dysfunction. So in that way, they follow a common pathway. At the same time, diabetic patients, as we see in our practice, are more prone to heart failure than, of course, we do see increased atherosclerosis also, but we see the incidence of heart failure quite a bit in diabetic patients. So there is some common pathway that links both diabetes and heart failure. DAPA-HF trial has gone on to show us that link. So there are multiple ways these SGLT2 inhibitors seem to be beneficial. And one thing very striking with the trial results was the separation of the curves happens very early in the study itself. So why this must be happening is the immediate effect of the SGLT2 inhibition is there is natriuresis and osmotic diuresis. Now this causes a very good control of blood pressure. There is loss of sodium, and it is seen that the interstitial edema is better responding to these SGLT2 inhibitors as compared to the loop diuretics that we use. So there are interesting and very important mechanistic benefits that are derived from the use of SGLT2 inhibitors right from the word go or right from the time they're administered. Beyond this, there are several other mechanisms they have postulated because of the ketogenesis, the cardiac metabolism improves, increased erythropoietin levels are seen, and then there's also increase in cardiac output because of the increased circulating glucagon levels. And then there's improvement of endothelial function, decrease this reduction in the LV mass. and decrease in the activity of the sodium hydrogen exchanger, etc. What I mean to say is all these mechanistic benefits that are there both in the immediate term, in the intermediate term, and the long term help to manage our heart failure patients better. Also, one important point is not only like you have said, sir, the improvement in terms of cardiovascular mortality or even all-cause mortality, which is a very strong endpoint. I must say, very few trials can achieve that. So the evidence is pretty strong. Not only that, there is also a good improvement in the functional class. So patients were actually checked with the Kansas questionnaire. So a lot of them have had improvement in their functional class. So that is a very important kind of endpoint. If you see the same thing that we saw with the ARNIs, the kind of improvement patients feel with the use of ARNIs. My take on this is good hypertension control, that is demonstrable. Good loss of sodium, that is again demonstrable. A good effect on remodeling, that is again a very important thing for heart failure. One last point before I conclude. One of the important things about heart failure is whether we'll be able to modulate the onset of heart failure. Now, this high risk group of people who have hypertension, who have diabetes, who have dyslipidemia, and various other comorbid conditions which can predispose them to heart failure, if they are administered these SGLT2 inhibitors way up in their that is the stage A of heart failure, and before patients at risk of heart failure who will go on to become heart failure patients, maybe that will prevent many patients from going into overt heart failure. That is number one. And the last point is, ultimately, the other point is like we are talking about cardio-diabetes. I think cardio-renal heart failure patients typically have renal dysfunction, quantifiable renal dysfunction. We see that in our practice. The DAPA-HF trial has that way recruited patients with a modest decrease in GFR, and that's a very challenging thing to do. A significant number of patients were having a GFR of less than 60 ml. So that way also the renal outcomes also have gotten better. The proteinuria decreases, and this goes on to help us manage our heart failure patients better. So I think there are benefits in cardio-diabetes division, there are benefits in cardio-renal division, and overall impact on the heart failure itself. So that way I feel SGLT2 inhibitors will become the frontline drugs, both for preventing heart failure, number one, and managing heart failure, number two. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Aditya, for your beautiful explanation. And previously, actually, we have been saying like two pathways for heart failure. One is sympathetic pathway, another one is a renin-angiotensin pathway. After this SGLT2 inhibitors, they have postulated another one, that is the renal pathway. So this renal pathway is also independent of sympathetic and independent of this one. So that's the reason this is also producing the maximum benefits. So I think, as you said, so definitely it's a game changer, particularly in cardiology. Diabetic patients, like a reduction in the hospitalization for heart failures, cardiovascular events, and renal events. Definitely it's a game changer. I think this should be the primary drug. As many societies also recommending this one as a. Okay, then I will move on to the next one. This is a role of SGLT2 inhibitors, that is in diabetic with and CKD. The patients with a CKD have a high risk of adverse cardiac and kidney and cardiovascular outcomes. CKD is an important contributor of illness and is associated with a diminished quality of life and reduced life. If you see the mortality of the congestive cardiac failure patients, the mortality rate is very high as the GFR falls. If you see the kidney, like a stage 1 to 5, compared to stage 1, stage 5 patients have more mortality and the hospitalizations are more. And at the same time, CKD also adversely influences the congestive cardiac failure and cardiovascular, because once the kidney is deranged, there is a more and more extracellular fluid, extracellular volume expansion that adds the preload, and indirectly hypertension that adds afterload, which stretches the myocardium. So indirectly, the stress on the heart muscle is more. So preload is going to be increased and afterload. Ultimately, because the stretching of the myocardium is more, so myocardium is failing more and more burden in the myocardium. And that may lead to decreased cardiac output. Again, cardiac output indirectly deranges the renal. So this is like a vicious circle. So the renal dysfunction is contributing to the cardiovascular dysfunction. Again, cardiovascular dysfunction is aggravating the renal. So both are working together. So with a further deterioration over a period of time. So SGLT2 inhibitors decrease the glycated hemoglobin levels and have shown favorable effects on kidney and cardiovascular outcomes in large clinical trials involving patients with type 2 diabetes mellitus. So may I have the next slide? This is a DAPA-CKD trial and that study design I'm going to explain. This is they included more than 18 years of age, EGFR 25 to 75 ml, and urinary albumin creatinine ratio, that is 200 to 5,000 milligrams per gram, and stable maximum tolerated. So all these patients, they have been treated with a regular dosage of AC inhibitors and ARBs. So they have tried over and above the AC inhibitor, standard guideline therapy. They have been receiving the standard tolerated dose of AC and ARB therapy. They excluded type 1 diabetes, polycystic kidneys, and immunosuppressive therapy within 6 months prior to enrollment. This study was presented recently at the ESC conference of 2020. And the total number of patients, they screened 4,304 patients. And dapagliflozin versus placebo. So dapagliflozin group consisted 2,152 patients and the same number in placebo group. This trial was stopped very early because of the very, very favorable effects. So because of the clear efficacy, they stopped this study very early. In this study, almost 34% patients constituted Asians and Indians constituted almost 4.67%. The median duration of follow-up 2.4 years. May I have the next slide? So this DAPA-CKD trial has shown very, very clearly there is significant reduction in primary composite endpoint, that is sustained decline in EGFR more than 50%, end-stage kidney disease, death from renal and cardiovascular causes, that is almost 39% reduction. And all-cause mortality reduction, 31%, and there is a 34% reduction in chronic dialysis, kidney transplantation, and renal death. So another one, the secondary composite endpoint, that sustained decline in EGFR more than 50%, end-stage kidney disease, and death from renal causes. And this secondary composite endpoint reduced by 44% in DAPA group versus placebo group. They also analyzed the death from cardiovascular causes or from heart failure hospitalization, that is almost 29% reduction. So indirectly, it is showing the significantly favorable effects on disease, the progression of the renal disease, and at the same time, repeat hospitalization for heart failure as well as renal death and all-cause mortality. Go to the next slide. So DAPA-CKD trial, the sub-analysis results showed at American Society of Nephrology. That was presented on October 23rd, 2020, that reduction in primary composite endpoint was considered consistent regardless of kidney disease. So these benefits were shown irrespective of kidney disease. Like, is it whether the patient is having, whether patients are having a diabetic nephropathy or glomerular nephritis or ischemic or hypertensive CKD or CKD of any. So there is a almost 37% reduction in diabetic nephropathy patients, and there is a 57% reduction in glomerular nephritis, and in ischemic and hypertensive CKD reduction 25%, CKD and other unknown causes there is 40% reduction. So reduction of cardiovascular death or hospitalization for heart failure was also similar across all kidney disease etiologies. So irrespective of kidney disease, the cardiovascular death and heart failure hospitalization reduction was significant in all patients, and the proportion of patients who discontinued dapagliflozin due to adverse effects are not seen compared to, there is no serious adverse effects compared to placebo group, and dapagliflozin reduced the kidney failure, risk of kidney failure, death from cardiovascular causes, and hospitalization for heart failure and all-cause mortality. That is irrespective of underlying etiology of kidney disease. Go to the next. So a similar study which was published earlier, that is like a the molecule tried was canagliflozin. Everybody knows it's a CREDENCE trial, and the CREDENCE trial was the first one to show the renal effects. So DAPA-CKD compared with the CREDENCE and the molecules DAPA versus canagliflozin. The DAPA-CKD sample size was 4,304 and almost similar number, 4,401. Asian patients constituted more in DAPA-CKD compared to CREDENCE, that is 19.9% versus 34%. Non-diabetic patients, they have not tried in the CREDENCE, but in DAPA-CKD, they tried in, that is almost constituted 32.5%, 32.5%, and lower limit of EGFR 25, that is 30. And primary endpoints, if you compare the primary endpoints, DAPA-CKD 39% versus 30% in CREDENCE, secondary endpoints 44% versus 34%, cardiovascular death or hospitalization for heart failure 29% versus 31%, all-cause mortality 31% versus 70%. So all-cause mortality much more favorable in DAPA-CKD versus CREDENCE. Here they included diabetic and non-diabetic patients. So though head-to-head comparison is not there, but the future head-to-head comparison may prove which one is superior. But as of now, the data more in favor of dapagliflozin. So both are very strongly positive trials. And go to the next one. So based upon this trial, dapagliflozin granted breakthrough therapy designation in US for kidney disease. And this is based upon the DAPA-CKD phase 3 trial. And this because the unprecedented reduction in the risk of kidney failure and cardiovascular or renal death in patients with chronic disease. This BTD accelerate the development and regulatory review. That means because the very immense effects, they stopped the trial very early because it has shown beyond doubt very highly effective in reducing the cardiovascular and renal outcomes. The next one. And this is updated 2020, that is a kidney disease KDIGO guidelines published in October 1, 2020. That is a kidney disease impact global outcomes guidelines. So if you see, all patients should be subjected for absolute like a glycemic control, optimal blood pressure control, lipid manage compulsory, and at the same time, the risk, the smoking cessation, ideal balanced diet, and exercise. That is very, very important in all patients with the diabetes with the CKD. And then most patients may require some like a SGLT2 inhibitors and RAS therapy. And some patients, if indicated, they require antiplatelet therapy. So lifestyle therapy is mandatory for all these patients. And first line therapy, you can try with metformin and the SGLT2 inhibitors. But if the EGFR less than 30%, SGLT should not be tried. And if patient is on dialysis, better to discontinue. And so despite using these drugs, if not controlled, you can try the next group of drugs, ideally GLP-1 receptor agonists. And among the others, this is the most preferable drug. And DPP-4 and insulin, sulfur, and other drugs can be used mainly to control the blood sugar levels. You have to maintain euglycemic level. Unless you maintain the glycemic control, that see that HbA1c is optimally controlled. And before 2008, FDA has not put any restrictions on the pharmaceutical company. And 2008 is the actually landmark year, because that time the mainly the glitazones, especially rosiglitazone, they showed many adverse cardiac events. They at that time they thought that increased thrombotic risk. So, but the trial has shown very clearly there is increased congestive cardiac failure. So at that time FDA has put a very mandatory guidelines saying that all drugs wherever they are launching, prior to launching, they have to prove a cardiovascular safety. That after 2008, there are many trials showing the efficacy of these anti-diabetic drugs. So it's a mandatory to show that they should not have any adverse effect on cardiovascular, and because the cardiovascular disease is the major determinant in the outcome of the diabetic patients. So the safety is very, very important. So because this FDA restriction, these trials have come and these trials have proven beyond doubt. These drugs are proven to be very, very beneficial in reducing the congestive cardiac failure, cardiovascular death, renal death, because previously none of the anti-diabetic drug has proven to be cardiovascular safety. They were neutral or they have shown adverse effects, but only these two group of drugs have shown cardiovascular safety, mainly GLP-1 receptor agonist and SGL2. SGL2 mainly for congestive cardiac failure. When there is no congestive cardiac failure, GLP-1 receptor agonist, particularly patients with a high atherosclerotic burden, that is also preferred drug. Go to the next one. So I think this question to Dr. Vikrant Reddy, that how do the results of DAPA-CKD trial influence clinical management of CKD patients? Dr. Vikrant, over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, and good evening to all of you. Sir, you have elaborated very well the DAPA-CKD trial, and it has clearly shown the benefits both in diabetic and especially non-diabetic population also, as you have shown the comparison between the other trials and DAPA-CKD trial, where it has included two highlighting features where they have included the non-diabetic patients also. 1/3 of them are non-diabetic patients, whereas all the diabetic trials like the Credence, the EMPA-REG, everybody has taken the diabetic patients into consideration, whereas 1/3 of population were non-diabetic in this. That is favoring towards the CKD management in this trial. And also they have reduced the GFR, the inclusion criteria of them was GFR of up to 25. All other trials, they have taken up to 30 GFR, where this has shown up to 25. And the results, and they have to end the trial very early, as you said, within 2.4 years. So the benefits were very, very clear, that there is a reduction in progression of CKD, 50% reduction in the progression of CKD, reaching to end-stage renal disease. Also, there is 44% decline in patients reaching ESRD. So the DAPA-CKD trial has clearly shown a benefit towards the management of CKD patients, and it has made it very clear that dapagliflozin also helps in non-diabetic CKD patients for preventing the rapid progression of renal failure. That's one of the most important thing, and I think this is the first SGLT2 inhibitor which has shown a beneficial role for non-diabetic CKD population. So definitely it has an influence on our clinical practice, that when we don't have many drugs for preventing the progression of CKD, this definitely will help in managing non-diabetic CKD patients for preventing the progression. And of course, for all the diabetic and heart failure patients along with the CKD, I think this is a better drug, as you have clearly mentioned in the previous slides, that heart failure, CKD, cardiovascular, everything go in a tandem. So this is one drug which helps to control all these aspects of managing a diabetic, CKD, and a cardiovascular patient. So again, reiterating that as this DAPA-CKD trial has shown a benefit on non-diabetic CKD patient, I think definitely this is a game changer for preventing the progression of CKD. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vikrant, for nicely elaborating. And I'll move on to the next slide. This is 2020, this is American Diabetic Association virtual congress. They showed the efficacy of, they analyzed again DAPA heart failure, that is nuanced diabetes. What is the effect of dapagliflozin on nuanced of diabetes? So here in the study, only 45 patients had a type 2 diabetes, but 50% did not have any type 2 diabetes. So as I mentioned earlier, DAPA heart failure, they have not studied only in diabetic patients. They have included heart failure, non-diabetic patients also at best. So they analyzed what is the new onset of type 2 diabetes. That is, they defined as a A1C more than 6.5% measured at 2 consecutive study visits. That a new onset diabetes mellitus, there is a significant reduction, that is by 32% in DAPA group compared to placebo group. The placebo group showed 7.1% about that is, they reported new onset of diabetes 7.1% in placebo group versus 4.9% in dapagliflozin. Indirectly, it is preventing the diabetes mellitus and is postponing. So the new onset of diabetes is significantly reduced. That is one of the advantage with the DAPA group. Go to the next one. And regarding the safety, is it safe compared to placebo? What is the comparison? That is in DAPA heart failure. If you see the volume depletion is not that significant, 75 points overall, 7.5% versus 6.8. It's not very significant compared to placebo. Renal adverse event, 6.5%, 7.2. Fractures, which were more often, it was noted in that a CANVAS trial, canagliflozin, and that is 2.1% in both groups. And amputation, which was more oftenly, it was observed with canagliflozin and CANVAS trial, the 0.5, almost same. It's equivalent to the placebo group. Major hypoglycemia, 0.2. So diabetic ketosis, it's not very sick. There is no complication of diabetic ketosis. The gangrene, 4 years gangrene, 0. So these were more oftenly noticed with the canagliflozin. In particularly, it was noted in the CANVAS trial. And if you see the overall discontinuation due to adverse event, almost similar, like 4.7 versus DAPA versus 4.9 in placebo group. So there is no major significant side effect. It's a very, very safe compared to almost equivalent to placebo. Go to the next one. So this was shown again in CKD trial. Sometimes not one trial is showing, even second trial also proven the same. And number is also big, almost 4,000 patients. So discontinuation of regimen due to adverse effect, 5.5% versus 5.7. You see DAPA versus placebo. And any serious adverse event, 29, it's slightly less in DAPA compared to placebo group. Amputations, 1.6 versus 1.8. And any definite or probable diabetic ketosis, 0. More in placebo, surprisingly. Fractures, 4 versus 3.2. Renal related adverse, 7.2, 8%, 8.7, less in DAPA group. Major hypoglycemia, 0.7, less compared to placebo. This is also surprising. Volume depletion, 5.9 versus 4.2. So compared to placebo, there is no increase in the incidence of side effects. It's a very, very safe drug and well proven in DAPA heart failure. Again, similar results were noticed in DAPA CKD trial. Go to the next one. So regarding the safety about the different anti-diabetic drugs. So sulfonylurea and insulin, hypoglycemia, one of the main side effect, and weight gain can happen. And this dapagliflozin, there is a weight loss, which is very favorable because the weight reduction causes it reduces the blood pressure, reduces the proneness for diabetes, and also reduce the lipid profile. So reduction of weight always carries the all advantages of mainly favoring the anti-atherosclerotic effects. That is, lipid profile will come down. It will be in a favorable way, and diabetes prevention will be there, and hypertension prevention once the weight reduction is there. And thiazolidinurins, mainly weight gain, fluid retention, particularly in congestive cardiac failure. We should be very, very careful. Here, weight loss, no edema, cardiovascular safety, no concerns of fractures. And DPP-4 inhibitors and heart failure, that is also not favorable. Cardiovascular, very, very safe, DAPA. And AGL2, this is compared to DAPA, canagliflozin, there is increased incidence of amputations, fractures, and for your genital infections also more often seen. Even DAPA group, they have not shown any increased genital infections. The GLP-1 analogs that increase the incidence of medullary thyroid cancer, which is not observed with the AGL2. So indirectly, this DAPA group has all favorable effects without any side effects, and is very, very safety, with a very safety profile. Go to the next one. So I think last question to Dr. Ashok, and this is based on published literature. How do you perceive the safety of dapagliflozin in type 2 diabetes mellitus management? Over to you, Dr. Ashok.
Sir, thank you so much, sir, for questioning one of the practical aspects, sir. I want to convey sincere thanks, sir. I want to convey sincere thanks to organizers. Hello, everyone. Sir, you have given elaborative explanation, sir. As you said, sir, it is quite safe. If we saw the major 3 trials, first one is DECLARE-TIMI, then DAPA-HF, then DAPA-CKD. 3 were consistently showed, not even single trial has given any some alarming signal. 3 were given consistently the safety signals in terms of most concernable one was, the variable one was amputation and gangrene. Before results of DECLARE-TIMI, every 2 weeks or 3 weeks, FDA used to give some warning, like there is a warning for Fournier's gangrene, there is a warning for the gangrene, there is a warning for amputation, fractures, and even bladder risk cancer, bladder carcinoma risk. So that was crystal clearly removed by the one of the major trial is DECLARE-TIMI, sir. As you know, it has included 17,000 patients, which is one of the longest data, which has followed for more than 4 years. Included the subjects which has included, if we include both Canvas program and EMPOWERING program. So studied from minute details, even Fournier's gangrene, the electrolyte disturbance, DKA occurrence. So as you elaborated clearly, it has quite a clear, clearly showing that it is safe. Only one thing is, key point is, we have to choose the person rightly, especially even though if we are giving to type 2 diabetes, some of them are insulinopenic, they are not having that much muscle built and body built. So they will show the signals of some insulinopenia. To that kind of individuals, better to not to try. That is one. And any history of recurrent urinary tract infection earlier, and significant problem in relation to the prostate causing the retention problem, and that is one we will take care about. And most importantly, the advice during the prescription, especially in terms of giving the adequate hydration and having the proper personalizing. In the last 5 to 6 months, we might have given around 600 plus prescription. Hardly I can say, sir, 1 or 2 patients might have been stopped due to genital mycosis. Apart from rest of the things are quite okay, sir. Only one is the proper hydration and personal hygiene. Without any hesitation, we can tell in a bold, clear way how to clean the genital area and how to maintain the hydration. And another interesting, important point is to avoid the euglycemic diabetic ketoacidosis. Especially this happens during the stressful conditions, like any moderate to severe degree of fever, which requires the advice from the hospital, or which requires the, it is looking like might require the hospitalization. some 6 to 8 episodes of loose stools or vomitings or severe degree of cough. So during this kind of period, we can advise the people to hold for 3 to 4 days. So that will avoid the major occurrence of euglycemic DTAs. If we can stress upon these 2 points, definitely it is quite safe. And as of now, sir, as you elaborated clearly, till now there was no drug which has given the benefit like GLT2 in terms of sugar reduction, reduction of glycemic variability, and reducing the weight, addressing the BP part to certain extent, reducing the central fat, most important thing, and preventing the deterioration or regression of the renal point of view, and most importantly the cardiac point of view. Such kind of wonderful or magical pill is there. We can take 1 or 2 minutes to give the precautions so that we can pass on the benefit to the needy individuals. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ashok, for your final inputs, making it very crystal clear and concluding everything. I think you made it very clear about the indications and the adverse events and everything from a day-to-day practice point of view. I think now he's going to host Kunal. Do you have any questions?
Yes, first of all, thanks to all the faculties that sharing that feedback on the 360 degree of aspect of the cardiorenal game changer, especially for the dapagliflozin. So here in the link, I can see some of the questions from our audience is that. So the question is that, especially this is for the chronic kidney disease condition, that if patient having a EGFR is around 50, then as per the DAPA-CKD, can we use dapagliflozin ahead than ACE inhibitors or ARBs for the chronic kidney disease management?
Yeah, actually now as per the DAPA-CKD, like a EGFR below 60, above 60, and that is above 25, definitely it has proven beyond doubt. But both drugs have a synergistic effect. You have to combine. You have to give a ACE inhibitor as well as this one. So both will have a different actions. Both will produce a synergistic effect. Both combination will give a much more favorable benefits. So unless it's contraindicated, you should not. But above 30, there is a definite proven benefit for ACE inhibitors also. Combine both. I think that is the ideal strategy.
Yes, sir, true. As you rightly said, I think combining would be a better option as compared to, as Kunal asked, whether we can straight away start with dapagliflozin. So I would still reserve that. We should start them with ACE inhibitors and ARBs as they are proven beyond doubt. So once we are comfortable with ACE ARBs, you can add on with the dapagliflozin. So that's what I would go with Dr. Sridhar's comment. Yeah.
And moreover, if you look at the trial, all the trial basically had patient on AS and ARB first, and DAPA then came onto the board.
Already on.
Correct, sir.
They have been receiving the AC inhibitor and ARB. Any trial.
Start the AS and ARB first. As sir, stabilize the GFR and look at the GFR stable, then add the dapagliflozin or HL inhibitor.
Yeah. Correct, sir. Yes.
Sir, one more question is here that do we need to measure the ketones when we are using SGLT2 inhibitors? Because the data is showing that sometimes there is increasing the ketone bodies in the body. So do we need to measure regularly, or what is your take on?
I think I mentioned very clearly, in case you suspect the patient is going to be a LADA kind of patient or patient insulin requiring, who may have type 1 or autoimmunity kind in background. So those patients are more likely to go into glycemic ketosis. So those you have to be careful about. Or in kind of stress, if somebody has an infection, somebody is planned for surgeries, that time definitely we should withdraw the SGLT inhibitors. If you take those precautions into mind, for a routine diabetes patient, we don't need to check ketones on a regular basis. But somebody has developed vomiting or had an alcohol binge, and then he had vomiting, then definitely we should check for ketones. If you look at the episodes of glycemic ketoacidosis, majority of them initially came with after alcohol, and they had a lot of vomiting.
Okay.
Or with this time of stress and surgical infections were there. So that is the time you have to be very careful about. For routine class of OP patient, we see nobody, we need not check ketones every time.
Okay.
As Aditya mentioned, in our practice, actually, we made it a mandatory. Now, all patients, whether patient like a cardiovascular disease, diabetes is there, some common renal dysfunction is there, we are definitely starting the DABA. So because these profound beneficial effects, because the hospitalization, it costs very much. You see, repeat hospitalization, patients are taking repeated admissions for heart failure. And renal is one of the worst adverse events. Suppose if the patient has coronary artery disease, mild LV function, we treat them, we take them for angio, that time contrast induced nephropathy, everything. So this is one of the major determinant for prognosis of the cardiovascular patients. Ideally, these patients should be subjected for gliflozin. I think these drugs are really wonderful drugs. Many cardiologists, they are very happy with these group of drugs and they are initiating in very early phase.
Okay. Sir, here one question related to heart failure is that what is the role of SGLT2 inhibitors in preserved ejection fraction?
Yeah, actually, even preserved ejection fraction also, actually none of the drugs is proven to be very, very beneficial. Like a TAPCAT trial, CHARM trial, there are many trials have come, but only thing is here, the mechanism is different. There you have to control the hypertension, comorbidities you have to control, even SGL2, diabetic patients, definitely, it is also very, very beneficial. Why? Because the mechanism, if you see, it reduces the preload, it reduces the afterload, and the natriuresis is there. So even NT-proBNP is coming down. So that is also very, very favorable, but always you check the NT-proBNP. If NT-proBNP is there, there is a definite diastolic dysfunction is there, diabetic patients are there. And when these patients, though the studies are not favoring, I think I don't hesitate to start these drugs, mainly to prevent the future renal failure, future repeated hospitalization for heart failure. Considering the physiology, considering the favorable effects, because if you see, indirectly the uric acid levels are coming down, the atherogenic will come down, inflammatory will come down, and even renal pathway, like a uricosuric effect, and even natriuresis effect, glucose reduction, and even HbA1c reduction, and even packed cell valve, like overall hematocrit value is more, and tissue hypoxia is less. As some of the earlier speakers said, the efficient, the fuel efficiency, that is also the ketone versus like a fatty acid and glucose. These are all favorable effects. I think, but you have to be very careful. And if no other alternative is there, if the diabetes and other subsets are there, I don't mind hesitating. But as of now, there is no definite data to say that this is very safe, should be used.
Okay. So,
Sir, Dr. Malhotra, you can comment.
Yeah. Can you repeat the question again, please?
The usage of DAPA gliflozin in patients with diastolic heart failure without diabetes.
If you look at the without heart failure, as I said, the main thing is to look at the risk factors of obesity and hypertension. That become very, very important. And
Yeah.
there we know that these drugs do have a plane to play in obesity and hypertension as such, better more than what we have the extraglycemic effect. So they will be definitely helpful in that area. And we already have studies in the primary prevention group. The patient who had even normal ejection fraction did have a lesser incidence of the heart failure in follow-up. It's not only the patient who have heart failure will benefit, the patient who have got no heart failure or the preserved ejection fraction will definitely have benefit of using the SGLT2 inhibitors.
So here is one question is that the international guideline, they're saying that if patient having a diabetes and high risk of cardiovascular disease, then we can use GLP-1 analogs and SGLT2 inhibitors as a first line before metformin. So can we use in Indian patients like that?
See, it's not that we need to have kind of difference in the approach. The after metformin or even before the metformin, also in case you have a patient with ASVD or CKD or heart failure. In heart failure, preferably it is always SGLT2 inhibitors. In early CKD, again, it is preferably to be used SGLT2 inhibitors. In case a patient has got a MACE events or ASVD, there the benefit can be given to both, and we can use GLP-1, which is quite effective. Srivi said already, it's a little injectable drug, little more expensive, difficult to use, but it's a very good, great drug to use. So there's no contraindication to use GLP-1 in Indian patients. They have shown to have good efficacy, good results. They have good data about CAD events now, and all are quite effective. And if you look at the glycemic control, you may not get the control with only one drug.
Okay.
You will require multiple drugs. So after metformin, you may also SGLT inhibitors, the A1Cs are not on target. You have to add a second agent. They will like to use other GLP-1 agonists.
So here one question is that when patient having a kidney failure, means chronic kidney disease, then what advice should be given to the patient when we are prescribing SGLT2 inhibitors?
Vikrant, you can comment. Unmute.
So basically, one thing is that we need to keep on monitoring their GFR, creatinines, and electrolytes. So that is very important. So once we start, especially the initial days, at least every week we should be able to check their creatinine and electrolytes, so that we are not their decline in GFR is not much. So that is one important thing, and as well the sugars, and hope that they are not dehydrating. So if they are normal patient, not heart failure patient, so they can have dehydration is a problem. So they are getting into any dehydration. So these are the things which we need to monitor when we initially put them on SGLT2 inhibitors.
Okay. So here I would like to take last question is there. In heart failure now, SGLT2 inhibitors are also considered as a first line, more or less. So we have already ACE inhibitors, ARBs, beta blockers, and mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. So can we use SGLT inhibitors, especially EMPA and dapagliflozin based on recent trial, as a first line in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction?
No, actually, if you see trials also, this was added over the guideline directed therapy. Like even heart failure also, they were receiving the ACE inhibitors, ARBs, even ARNI. But over that drugs, when you add also, they got the more benefit. So but at the same time, so because heart failure patients, you can start also, but the trials clearly already patients who have been on standard guideline directed therapy, they've had it. One of the advantage of this drugs, not with many side effects, you can combine. So now simultaneously, we start like a beta blocker, ACE inhibitor or ARB combination. If they are combined, if you are tolerating ACE or ARB, or even now straight away go with the ARNI therapy also. Now the recommendations have changed. ARNI plus beta blocker combination, then MRA, then combination of MRA. Suppose if the heart rate despite beta blocker is more than 70, you can add ivabradine based upon the SHIP trial. Okay. Suppose if the rate is less than 70 and wide QRS is there, then still refractory, you can think of the CRTD. Suppose if some patients with renal dysfunction, if they are unable to tolerate, you can combination of nitrates and hydrogen combination you can try. But simultaneously with these drugs, you can add even this one also, because the guidelines were almost 2016 guidelines, heart failure guidelines, updated guidelines recently. But if you see the Canadian heart failure guidelines, they were recommended in the first phase, you can add this one. But the guidelines, they are revising, and now they have updated guidelines. They have introduced this drug as a first line also, in addition to these drugs. So both, that's the reason I told you, 3 pathways are there. We are attacking the sympathetic pathway, we are attacking the renin-angiotensin pathway, we are attacking the renal pathway. All are additive. So they have even estimated the reduction of mortality rate when you combine all these things, almost 65% reduction in the mortality rate. So that's the reason now we don't hesitate to combine this drug along with these beta blockers, ACE inhibitor or ARNI, along with the MRA. These 3 are standard. Along with this one, add this one.
So I think now that's very clear that how to use and when to add these drugs in heart failure patient. So I think, sir, now there are some questions, but I think we have discussed in our panel discussion. So with this here, I would like to end the panel discussion, and I would like to thank our all the panelists Dr. M.S. Aditya, Dr. Sridevi, Dr. Sumana, Dr. Ashok, and Dr. Vikrant Reddy for giving their valuable feedback and sharing and your opinion regarding dapagliflozin and its role as a cardiorenal game changer. And my sincere and heartfelt thanks to our both the moderator and speakers, Dr. R.N. Mehrotra and Dr. Sridhar Kasturi sir, for deliberately presenting the slides and taking a moderation at a very effective level, so that those who have joined for this webinar, definitely they have got more clarity at how to use these drugs with recent data. So with this, once again, I am thanking everyone, and with this, take care.
Thank you, all of you, and very happy to interact with you. Wish you all a very great night. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank
Thank
you,
you, Ravi,
same
sir.
here. Thank you. Thank you.